My daughter's fiancé's family marched into the townhouse I gave her and claimed it as their own. They thought I would stand aside, just an old father too tired to fight back. But they had no idea the quiet words I spoke next would send them fleeing faster than they'd arrived. Before I share the full story, may I ask a small favor? If you enjoy hearing the lessons an old man has gathered through a lifetime of trials and triumphs, please subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Every story I tell carries years of sacrifice and memory, and your support means more to me than you'll ever know. I'm Richard Caldwell, 68 years old, with a left knee that predicts the weather better than the news and a pocket full of peppermint candies I hand to nervous receptionists and crying children. Most mornings I wake before the sun. Habit, I suppose. Years of early shifts and long commutes trained me for dawn. I start the kettle, warm my hands around a chipped mug, and sip quietly while the light crawls over the marsh behind our house. Margaret, my wife of 44 years, says those minutes make me look younger, as if the silence smooths the creases from my face. I wasn't born into ease. My father swung a hammer. My mother took in sewing to keep food on the table. I learned early that a thing's worth was measured by how long it could last. A pair of shoes, a promise, a marriage. Margaret and I built our life the same way, carefully, piece by piece, double shifts. A second-hand car I coaxed through 15 winters. A small savings jar tucked inside the bread box. Every brick in our life was laid with sacrifice. When our daughter Elena was born, I made her a vow I never spoke out loud. A vow that she would stand on firmer ground than I ever had. That vow shaped everything that followed. I took night classes to move from janitor to facilities manager. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid steadier, and it gave me pride. I kept a little black notebook in my shirt pocket, scribbling down every hinge that needed tightening, every pipe that rattled. Fixing what was broken became my life. And I suppose, in some ways, it became my language of love. Elena grew up watching that notebook. She was a curious child, always leaning over my shoulder as I sketched crooked diagrams of ductwork and boiler parts. While other children scribbled in coloring books, she'd sit with her microscope, fascinated by the tiny creatures in pond water. "Dad, look, they move," she'd cry, tugging at my sleeve. And no matter how tired I was, I'd put down my tools, crouch beside her, and marvel with her at the hidden world. When she left for college, Margaret and I stood in the driveway waving until her car turned into a speck. The house was suddenly too quiet, too neat. We downsized to a modest home by the harbor, and after years of scraping by, we finally set aside enough to restore a beautiful old townhouse in Charleston. It had belonged to a retired schoolteacher. Time had not been kind to it. Scuffed floors, peeling paint, windows clouded by salt. But the bones were strong. When I laid my hand along the banister, I felt honesty in the wood. For 3 years I poured myself into that townhouse. I saved where I could, hired craftsmen where skill mattered most. We straightened joists, reset windows, and coaxed new life into weary brick. Margaret chose colors that reminded her of dawn. A pale blue like morning sky, a soft cream like sunlight across plaster. Slowly, the house began to breathe again. We never called it an investment. We called it a gift. Not a bribe, not a bargaining chip, just a blessing we wanted to lay at Elena's feet. A home that said, "You are worthy of stability. You are worthy of joy." By then, she had worked her way through the corporate ranks at Sterling & Partners, climbing patiently from internships to positions of respect. When she told us she was engaged to Daniel Mercer, Margaret's eyes glowed with hope. We thought perhaps our daughter's life was aligning into something steady, something kind. Daniel was charming in the beginning. Polite words, a firm handshake, wildflowers for Margaret. I noticed the rubber band still on the stems, fresh from the market, but I said nothing. Life had taught me the difference between small mistakes and dangerous patterns. You wait. You watch. In those months, our days carried a gentle rhythm. I took early walks when the cobblestones were still wet with dew. On Tuesdays, I volunteered at the workshop, teaching younger men how to guide a chisel without losing a thumb. Fridays, Margaret and I took the ferry to watch gulls harass the wind. We'd return to the townhouse, put on music a little too loud for our age, and slow dance on the polished floor, laughing whenever my knee clicked like a stubborn metronome. I'm a man of quirks, ones Elena teases me about. I keep spare fuses in the glove box. I carry 2 handkerchiefs, one for myself, one clean in case a stranger needs it. I talk to the house while I work. Easy now, I whisper to a stubborn hinge. We'll set you right. Margaret says houses know when they're loved. I believe her. There's one memory I keep pressed in my heart like an old photograph. Elena was 8, and winter bit hard. The furnace died in the night. While she slept under 3 quilts, I sat cross-legged on the floor with a flashlight between my teeth, coaxing warmth back into the motor. My fingers were numb, but when heat finally sighed through the vents, I laid my hand on the grate and felt tears sting my eyes. I had kept my promise. She would not go cold. That night I swore that if I could ever give her a home where winter could never touch her, I would. And so when the townhouse was finished, we planned carefully. We filled it with flowers, set a lemon cake on the table, polished the brass until it gleamed. I practiced what I'd say when we handed her the keys, though my throat always tightens at moments like that. The day came golden and soft. Elena stepped through the door and froze, her eyes wide, her breath catching. I placed the keys in her hand. It's yours, I whispered. To build your life in. Her tears came fast, her arms around us tight. Margaret kissed her hair. I tucked my shaking hands into my pockets. For a rare moment, I believed the world was kind. I allowed myself to dream of Sunday dinners, of children racing down the hall, of laughter ringing off the crown molding. But life has its way of testing what you build. You sand, it scuffs. You straighten, it warps. And sometimes, when you're admiring all the bright paint and solid lines, you miss the faint creak that means trouble has already slipped inside. I thought we were safe. I thought the gift was enough. But peace has a way of ending suddenly. And that's exactly what was about to happen. The front door swung open with a force that rattled the glass panes, and in they came, Daniel's family, uninvited, unannounced, and unashamed. Harold led the way, boots thudding against the polished wood I had labored over for months. Denise followed, her perfume thick in the air, her voice already rising with complaints about parking. Gregory and Monica trailed close behind, their son Caleb dragging a toy car that screeched along the fresh floors. I glanced at Elena. The keys to her new home were still in her hand, her mouth open in shock. "Dad, I didn't know they were coming," she whispered. "Neither did I muttered, my jaw tight. Harold slapped the banister with a heavy hand, as if he were testing a horse for purchase. "Solid wood. Gregory, you'll like it here. Strong bones in this place. You'll settle in just fine." Gregory grinned, striding toward the master suite as though it already belonged to him. "Finally," he said, chuckling. "About time I got a real room. Living over the garage is for kids." My stomach turned. Then Denise, with her muddy shoes, walked into the bedroom and flopped onto the new quilt Margaret had so carefully chosen. She dug her heels into the fabric, grinding dirt into the threads. "Now this," she sighed, stretching out as though it were her throne. "This is comfort." I clenched my fists. Margaret gasped and pressed her hands to her mouth. Elena's face reddened, but her voice was calm, almost trembling with the effort. "This isn't your home," she said firmly. "It's mine." Daniel shifted closer to her, his tone cutting but casual. "Elena, don't make a scene. They're family. Of course they'll stay here." Her head whipped toward him. "Stay here? Daniel, this house was my parents' gift to me. To us. It's not a boarding house." Denise laughed, a sharp, mocking sound. "Oh, sweetheart, marriage means sharing. You'll cook, you'll clean, and you'll keep us comfortable. That's your role now. Isn't that right, Daniel?" And he nodded, without hesitation. Her lips parted in disbelief. "You agree with them? You'd really stand there and let them walk through my home like this?" Daniel crossed his arms, his voice colder now. "Stop exaggerating. This is what a good wife does. She looks after her husband's family." Those words landed like a slap. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Then Harold, as if to punctuate the moment, struck a match and lit a cigar. He exhaled a heavy plume of smoke, then stubbed the end against the brand-new nightstand. A black scorch mark spread instantly across the wood I had polished with my own hands. Margaret gasped, rushing forward. "Please! That furniture!" Harold waved her off with a scoff. "Relax. A house is meant to be lived in." I felt something snap inside me. Not rage. No, something sharper. A cold line of resolve. The disrespect wasn't just in their muddy shoes or their smoke. It was in their certainty that they owned us, that Elena would bow to them. But my daughter didn't bow. Not this time. Her voice rang out, firm despite her trembling. "Enough. You will not treat me like a servant in my own home." Daniel scowled, his voice tightening. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." Her answer was ice. "The only one making it hard is you." The room fractured with tension. Denise's laugh grew shrill. Harold slammed his hand on the dresser. Gregory muttered about deeds and signatures, as if speaking it could make it true. And me? I stood still, steady, my father's old words echoing in my mind. A man's home is his honor. "Don't let anyone take that from you." I stepped forward, my voice calm but iron beneath it. "You will leave. Now." For a moment, no one moved. Then Elena straightened beside me, shoulders squared, her chin high. "Dad's right. This is my home. If you can't respect that, you're not welcome here. And Daniel, if you stand with them instead of me, then maybe you don't belong here either." Daniel's silence said more than words ever could. He looked at her, then at his parents. But he didn't defend her. He didn't choose her. He just stood there, and in that moment, the engagement crumbled like dust. Her voice didn't waver. "We're done," Denise hissed under her breath. Harold muttered about ungrateful daughters. Gregory's smirk disappeared. They shuffled, collected their things, and moved toward the door, their indignation a poor disguise for defeat. Daniel lingered, torn, searching for words that wouldn't come. Elena's final command was steady, final. "Leave. With them." He did. I watched from the doorway as they disappeared into the evening light, their shadows stretching long and crooked on the street. The door shut behind them with a weight that shook the very walls. For a moment, silence filled the house. Margaret's hands trembled. Elena exhaled, steady but pale, her face a mask of heartbreak and strength. I thought it was over. But that wasn't the worst part. Not by far. Because a week later, Daniel returned. And this time, he wasn't alone. He carried something colder than disrespect. He carried a debt. And that's when I knew I would not stay silent. The night after Daniel and his family stormed out, the house felt heavier than stone. The rooms, once filled with promise, seemed to hold their breath in silence. Elena sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a teacup gone cold. Margaret moved restlessly, scrubbing an already spotless counter just to keep her hands busy. And me? I sat still, staring at the lemon cake untouched on the table, feeling the sting of humiliation deep in my chest. I had built this townhouse as a sanctuary. Every hour of labor, every drop of sweat, was meant to give my daughter a place of peace. And yet, it had become the very stage for her heartbreak. The quilt, the nightstand, the banister I had polished. These were no longer symbols of care, but reminders of how quickly respect can be trampled under muddy shoes and careless words. That night, sleep was no friend of mine. I tossed in bed, the ache in my knee sharper with every turn, haunted by the memory of Daniel's silence when Elena asked for his support. A man's silence, when his voice is needed most, can cut deeper than a blade. I closed my eyes and saw Denise's mocking laugh, Harold's cigar leaving its black scar, Daniel's nod when asked if his bride should serve them. The betrayal echoed long after the door shut behind them. I thought back to sacrifices past, those quiet, unseen choices made for Elena's sake. I remembered her first bicycle. We didn't have enough money, not really. But I worked a weekend double shift repairing boilers in a high school basement, just so I could buy it before her birthday. I remembered the night pneumonia racked her body when she was 13. I sat awake in a straight-back chair, one hand on her arm, whispering over and over, "You'll be all right, my girl. I'll see to it." And I had. I always had. Yet now, watching her tremble at a table meant to be hers, I felt the old vow burn in my chest again. I would not let anyone break her. Not then, not now, not ever. The next morning the phone rang. It was Elena, her voice thin but steady. "Dad, you won't believe this." Daniel had emailed her a spreadsheet. A cold, calculated list of so-called debts. Coffees, bus fares, sandwiches. Every trivial expense he had ever covered, tallied to the penny. $3,142.58. I gripped the receiver tighter. "And what did you say?" "Nothing. He's coming by my office this afternoon, with his parents." Her voice cracked. "Dad, I don't know what to do." I did. That afternoon, I climbed the marble steps of her office building. My knee protested every step, but I ignored it. Inside, I saw them, Daniel, Harold, and Denise, holding a poster board scribbled with numbers, like schoolchildren staging a farce. Their voices carried sharp and cruel. "You owe me," Daniel declared loudly, as coworkers glanced over. "Everything I ever spent on you. I want it all back." Elena stood frozen, cheeks burning with shame. I stepped forward, pulling my checkbook from my coat. My hand trembled, but my voice did not. "Here," I said, writing carefully. $3,200. That covers your little tally." Harold smirked. Denise's lips curled in triumph. Daniel reached out for the check, but I held it firm between my fingers. "Before you take this," I said, my voice rising just enough for the gathered crowd to hear, "let's list what you owe Elena. The cell phone she bought for you, the birthday gifts she paid for your father, the countless dinners you forgot to cover, the rent she carried on her own shoulders." The color drained from Daniel's face. Murmurs rippled through the office. A manager stepped forward, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "This is harassment," the manager said firmly. "Unacceptable. Leave now." Daniel sputtered, fumbling for excuses. Denise hissed about ungrateful daughters. Harold muttered curses under his breath. But the three of them, once so arrogant, now slunk away like shadows. That night Elena sat again at our table, her hands steadier than before. Her eyes met mine. "Thank you, Dad." I reached across, laid my weathered hand over hers. "You don't need to thank me. You only need to remember who you are and who you're not." But the storm hadn't ended. Within days, anonymous posts appeared online. Lies. Rumors meant to smear Elena's name. Words that, if left unchecked, could trail her for years. Margaret worried. Elena tried to be strong, but I saw her hands tremble when she scrolled through her phone. That was when I called our attorney. Letters went out. Takedowns, preservation notices, warnings. A harassment report was filed. Soon after, a restraining order was granted. But Daniel wasn't done. He sent one more attempt, a handwritten letter. His words were poisoned with guilt and veiled threats. "You'll regret this," he wrote. "No one will ever love you like I did." I tore the paper in two. "That's not love," I told her. "That's control, and you've already broken free." Still, in the quiet hours, I walked the townhouse halls alone. My hand brushed the banister, my voice low, almost speaking to the house itself. She's stronger than they know, stronger than even she believes. And in those sleepless walks, an idea took root, not vengeance born of anger, but of something colder, something sharper, a seed watered by betrayal. I began to think, very carefully. I've lived long enough to know that true revenge is never loud. It doesn't come in fists or shouts. It comes in silence, in patience, in timing so precise it feels like fate itself. The night after tearing Daniel's letter, I sat at the old oak desk in the townhouse study. For decades, I had drawn crooked diagrams of pipes and ductwork at that desk. This time, my pencil moved across the page not for boilers, but for something else, plans to protect my daughter's peace and to end the chaos once and for all. I began with the law. The restraining order was already in place, but I knew men like Daniel and Harold too. Men who believe rules are made for others, never for them. I knew they would try again. That arrogance was predictable. And predictability is a weakness if you know how to use it. So I contacted our attorney, an old friend I'd once helped when his furnace nearly gave out one brutal January. Funny thing about helping people. Life has a way of circling back. He promised me his full attention, told me, "Richard, Document everything. I almost laughed. If there's one thing I've done my whole life, it's document. My little black notebooks were filled with notes, receipts, details. Every screw tightened, every hinge straightened, every broken promise logged in my own quiet script. And now, those notebooks were about to become something more, a weapon Daniel never saw coming. Next, I turned my mind to Elena's reputation. Words, once loose in the world, can stain a life. Those poisonous posts had been forced down, but I wasn't satisfied. I wanted the door barred shut. So our attorney prepared cease and desist letters, backed by digital evidence, ready to be brought before a judge if needed. Daniel had turned the internet into his battleground. I would make it his downfall. But there was more to this than paperwork and lawyers. Elena needed to see that her life wasn't over because of him. She needed proof that she was free to rise, free to breathe again, so I encouraged her when she spoke of the regional conference at Sterling and Partners. "Go," I told her. "Show them who you are. Don't shrink because someone tried to make you small. Speak as though no one ever tried to silence you." And she did. She stood on that stage, voice trembling at first, but steadying with every sentence. I watched her shoulders square, her eyes lift, and I saw the old sparkle return. When she stepped down, applause filling the room, I knew something had shifted. That was also the day Jonathan Hayes walked into her life. A man with calm eyes, the kind who listens before speaking. He carried no arrogance, no entitlement, just presence. He offered her water, not pity. Respect, not control. I didn't interfere. Sometimes a father's job is not to shield, but to step aside and let the right door open. But still, I prepared. Because men like Daniel always come back. Little did they know, I had already reinforced the very ground beneath Elena's feet. The deed to the townhouse? Locked, ironclad, with protections that made it untouchable. The savings account I had quietly built for her future? Expanded, placed entirely in her name. The more they tried to grasp, the more they'd find only air. There were moments of doubt, of course. I'd lie awake, the house creaking around me, and wonder if I was being too cautious. What if Daniel returned not with words, but with chaos? What if they pushed harder, dirtier? But then I heard my father's voice in memory. "Don't fight fire with fire, son. Build a wall of stone, and let the flames burn themselves out." So I built my walls, not of mortar, but of patience, law, and truth. Weeks passed. The silence almost felt like peace. But peace, I knew, was only the lull before the next storm. And sure enough, the storm came. One afternoon, Elena called. Her voice was taut. "Dad, he's outside my office." I tightened my grip on the phone. "Stay where you are. Don't confront him alone." By the time I arrived, Jonathan was already there, steady as stone beside her. Daniel paced on the sidewalk, red-faced, spitting words too fast to follow. Harold sat in the car like a bitter general watching a battle slip away. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I simply stepped forward and held up the paper that had become my shield, the restraining order. My voice was low, but it carried. "One step closer, Daniel, and this paper becomes your prison." The effect was instant. Daniel froze. The arrogance drained from his face, leaving something hollow in its place. Harold shifted uncomfortably in the car. Denise tugged at her sleeve, and for once, their bluster had no wind behind it. I knew then, the stage was ready. The trap wasn't mine, it was theirs, built by their own arrogance, their own cruelty. And soon it would close. The stage was set. All I had to do was wait. The day of reckoning didn't arrive with thunder. It came quietly, like a storm building on the horizon. You can smell it in the air before the first drop falls. Daniel had circled Elena's life like a hawk denied its prey. First the spreadsheet, then the online slander, then the stunt outside her office. Each move more desperate, each attempt weaker. Still, I knew he wouldn't stop. Not until he was faced with a truth so undeniable that even he couldn't twist it. That moment came on the day of Elena's biggest presentation yet, an event for Sterling and Partners, where executives, investors, and colleagues filled the main hall. It was the kind of moment that could define a career. She had prepared for weeks, every word polished, every slide perfected. And of course, Daniel chose that day to make his move. I was already waiting in the lobby, hoping to surprise her with flowers after her speech. But the elevator doors slid open, and out stepped Daniel, with Harold and Denise at his side. Harold carried a folder bulging with papers. Denise's face was twisted in that familiar sneer, and Daniel, he wore a smirk, the smug look of a man who believed he had finally cornered his prey. "Where is she?" He barked at the receptionist, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "She owes me, and today everyone will hear about it." I stepped between him and the hallway. My knee ached, but my voice did not. "Not today, Daniel. Not ever again," Harold sneered. "You think you can stop us, old man?" I unfolded the document from my jacket pocket, its edges creased but its power intact. The restraining order gleamed under the lobby lights. "I don't have to stop you," I said evenly. "The law already has." Denise scoffed, but I saw her eyes flicker. Doubt, the first crack in their armor. Daniel shoved forward, ignoring the warning. His voice rose, echoing across the marble. "This isn't about the law. She owes me thousands. She used me, and everyone is about to know it." And then, as if the universe had cued it, the conference room doors opened. Executives and investors poured out into the lobby, chatter dying the moment they caught sight of the scene. And there was Elena, standing tall in the doorway, her face pale but her voice clear. "No, Daniel," she said. "The truth is, you used me, and now everyone will know it." Gasps rippled through the crowd. She stepped forward, and I placed a file into her hands, the one I had prepared with meticulous care. Receipts, bank transfers, notes from my black notebooks, every gift she had bought. The phone, the rent, the endless tabs she had covered, all laid out neatly, every figure matching, every detail precise. Elena handed the file to her manager. He flipped through the pages, his brows rising higher with each line. Finally, he closed it with a snap. His voice was cold steel. "Mr. Mercer, this looks less like a debt and more like harassment." The color drained from Daniel's face. His mouth opened, but no words came. Denise fidgeted, tugging her purse strap higher on her shoulder. Harold's bluster shrank into silence. And then came the final blow. Our attorney, who had been waiting quietly at the edge of the lobby, stepped forward. His voice was calm, deliberate. "Mr. Mercer, you and your family are now in violation of this restraining order. You've harassed Ms. Caldwell in her workplace. Again, I'll be filing this with the court immediately." The crowd stiffened, whispers rising. Daniel looked around, realizing there was no sympathy left in the room, no audience to charm, just shame. Security arrived, firm hands guiding them toward the doors. Daniel sputtered excuses. Denise muttered something about ungrateful daughters. Harold glared at me, but even his stare lacked fire now. Their footsteps echoed as they were led outside, each one heavier than the last. When the glass doors closed behind them, the silence that followed was thick. Elena's co-workers stared, not at her with pity, but with admiration. Some even clapped softly. Jonathan stepped forward, calm and steady, a reassuring presence at her side. Elena turned to me, her eyes shining with tears. "It's over, isn't it?" I nodded, my throat tight. "Yes, my girl, it's over." In that moment I felt something I hadn't in months. Peace. Revenge hadn't come in rage or destruction. It had come in patience, in truth, in timing. And as I stood there, watching my daughter reclaim her life, I realized something else. Revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives in silence, in dignity, in the simple act of standing tall, while those who sought to control you collapse under their own weight. And in that silence, I finally felt free. When I look back on it now, I don't dwell on the shouting, the cigar burns, or the petty spreadsheet of debts. What lingers in my memory is the silence that followed. The kind of silence that only comes after truth has spoken louder than lies ever could. For months, Daniel and his family believed they could take what was never theirs, my daughter's dignity, her peace, even her home. They mistook kindness for weakness. They mistook patience for surrender. But what they never understood is that patience, when guided by wisdom, is not surrender at all. It is strength waiting for its moment. The Charleston townhouse still stands, its windows bright in the afternoon light, its polished floors reflecting the life it was meant to hold. Elena visits often, sometimes with Jonathan, sometimes alone. She laughs more freely now, not the strained laugh of someone trying to keep the peace, but the full-hearted laugh of a woman who knows she's safe. When she speaks of her future, her voice carries not fear, but hope. And me. I walk those halls slowly, my hand brushing the banister I once sanded smooth, listening to the echoes of what we endured. Not echoes of humiliation, but of resilience. Not echoes of defeat, but of quiet triumph. That house is no longer just brick and mortar. It is a reminder that no one, no matter how entitled or arrogant, can erase what has been built on sacrifice and love. Daniel thought he could claim control with numbers on a page. Harold and Denise thought they could claim a home by walking through its doors. But they lost long before the court stamped its papers. They lost the moment Elena refused to shrink, the moment she chose dignity over despair. That, to me, was the truest form of quiet revenge. Not anger, not shouting, not even the check I wrote in that office lobby. The revenge was in living well, in standing tall and walking forward into a life they could never touch. And so I say it now, for anyone who has ever been underestimated. Quiet revenge is not plotting in shadows. Quiet revenge is choosing peace, choosing dignity, choosing to rise. That was my daughter's victory, and that was mine too. Would you have stayed silent or spoken as I did? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one.